the centrifuge facility, there were the European-type community gardens, the food being used for human consumption. That gave me a great deal of assurance, because if there was anything getting out of those buildings, then there would be a problem. There was no problem.
Despite the reviews from their neighbors, the people of the small communities closest to the site were unimpressed. In fact, they still feel downright betrayed, at gross missteps by their leaders. One example they say they'll remember for all time is their senator trying to allay fears of radiation.
This is an ordinary dish that you buy at the supermarket. You can tell it's just full of, by the way, I don't want to eat off one of these things.
Of course, that's not an ordinary plate. Orange Fiesta ware was made with uranium oxide and has been banned since the 40s.
You said it was an ordinary plate that you could buy at any supermarket.
No, I did not.
This is an ordinary dish that you buy at the supermarket. You can tell.
When LES come to my home and brought some crystal glass or rocks or something in a jar, and they said it was uranium, and they pulled it out in your hand. They said you can just hold it in your hand and it won't even hurt. And well, I didn't know nothing about the stuff at that time, but as time rolled on, I learned more about it, and I found out you can't hold that stuff in your hand.
This week, better than 5 years after plans for the Claiborne site were unveiled, CANT members were still trying to hold back the uranium plant. This night, they were organizing for a protest march in the morning.
If the street is full of y'all, when the people come in here from EPA, they will see that it's not under control. And also, when they go back, they will report that. So y'all, let's get somebody out on the street early morning at 9 o'clock.
Thursday morning, 4, maybe 5 men stand on the sidewalk in front of the Claiborne Parish government building. No signs, no slogans, certainly no blocking traffic, and hardly noticed by anyone. For all the fire and vigor of the night before, there is barely a demonstration at all.
We've asked repeatedly LES to bring forth their information. They did surveys. Who is in favor of this plant and who isn't? We think that the majority of the people in Claiborne Parish don't even want this plant. And again, we're going to keep bringing this back. We are going to continue fighting it as long as it takes.
Inside, it's a slightly more cantankerous scene. CANT has had some victories in their fight. Roy Martis, a CANT supporter, was elected to replace a plant supporter. It happened again recently. Another parish commissioner was elected who may also vote against the plant. The issue at this week's meeting of the Claiborne Parish Police Jury, whether these town fathers might rescind the parish's offer to reroute the road and thus stall the uranium plant.
We saw fit to go with the people over the project in past, with the halfway house, with the low-level waste dump, with some roads concerns around the lake. And we all kind of looked at it, and there were some projects that we might have want done, but once we saw that the will of the people were that they wanted it as it were, we leaned towards the people. We have been consistency in kind of serving and leaning towards our people. And I would just ask that same thing would be considered out there in my area. I was not the jury person at that particular time, but I am now, and I've been re-elected. So I would ask that in the form of a motion that resolution be rescinded, until which time we could do a further study on it.
The motion is to rescind a resolution of the jury of, am I saying right, October 26,
October 26, 1989.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Joe.
Abstain.
Okay. Ed.
No.
The environmentalist fell a vote short.
So we got.
The motion is denied.
Yeah, that's right.
They are not concerned about us out there in Forest Grove and Center Spring. They are not concerned about our children. They are not concerned about the school. They are not concerned about anything, the water either. Because if they reroute that road, they're going to have to reroute the water line too. And when I knew about that and what they was going to do, I read it in the paper. No one come through, and they pretend they done took a survey and come through and talk to the people in the community. But no one ever come through and talk to me.
North and south of where Louisiana Energy Services wants to build its plant, CANT has erected mocking signs. Across the highway is the community of Arizona. Once the railroad was set to come through here, it instead went through Homer. This is now Homer. This is now the town of Arizona. Mr. R.T. Ellis.
Well, Arizona is an old Indian trading post about a mile south of here, and years ago it was the original road from what they call Mount Lebanon, which is down below Arcadia, from there into Arkansas. This was the road that went north.
Is it possible the communities here on the outskirts of Homer are missing another big chance to be more than a historical footnote? Mary Boyd speaks for LES.
Oh, but it occurs to me that far more people are in favor of this project. We've had wonderful support for this project from day one when it was announced. And so while we understand that certainly it has caused some concern and unhappiness among some folks, and for which we regret, we are confident that in the long run, even the folks who today are against it will begin to accept it as part of the community, but that's probably many years down the road. But for right now, we've been very pleased by the support that we have in this parish.
How many jobs do you say you'll generate?
During construction, we expect about 400 jobs at the peak of construction, and during operation, about 180 positions, full-time, permanent. And the majority of those, about 2/3 to 3/4, we expect to be filled by Claiborne Parish residents and people from the surrounding region.
This is the site, 442 now clear-cut acres in northwestern Louisiana, just below the Arkansas border, north-central Claiborne Parish. Land around here goes for $300 to $400 an acre, even with timber on it. LES must have wanted the site badly. They paid $1,200 an acre. But why here? Why locate one of the world's most industrially sophisticated gas centrifuges to spin out uranium in a parish whose principal economic base is fast-growing lobleaf pine? Why locate a uranium enrichment plant in rural Claiborne Parish?
Well, first, why Louisiana? Northern Louisiana is very technically appropriate for our site because it has very low possibility of a damaging earthquake, and that's important for the reliability of our equipment. We're also in Louisiana because of the strong support of Senator J. Bennett Johnston, who's very knowledgeable about energy matters, having headed the Senate Energy Committee.
A low-level waste dump was supposed to came in here in '87 in the other folks' neighborhood. They didn't want it. They voted it out. Now it come back in '89 across the track in our neighborhood. Why can't we vote it out? We can't even get a vote. Now what you call that?
Mary Boyd came in here with this plant talking about LES, and this plant is so good, and this plant is a real good plant. And it's a clean plant. It's squeaky clean. You can just eat ice cream off the floor. And they done, I tell you what they did. They started telling lies in the beginning, and they still telling lies.
Claiborne Parish also has a strong reputation for having an excellent workforce. And since we would be employing those folks, we wanted to, of course, be in an area where people are very receptive to hard work, but this will give them an opportunity for clean, high-tech jobs.
To those people in Forest Grove and Center Springs, right around where the plant would be built, they have a concern that this is radiation, this is uranium. That means something different, I think, mentally to people than simple chemicals. Have you done anything wrong in communicating to them what this is about?
We have worked very hard to communicate with them, and I feel very concerned for people who have genuine concerns. And if we have not done a good job in that regard, then it is very regrettable. But we have a long history of providing information and on-site tours. Many people in Forest Grove and Center Springs were invited to see these plants in Europe. So every opportunity has been made for people to get information. And we certainly continue to do that. And we do regret that there are people who are unhappy about the project, but we also know that there are a lot of people who are very happy about it, and some of them do live in Forest Grove and Center Springs.
The Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund is a formidable band of environmental attorneys helping CANT fight the uranium plant. This week, attorney Natalie Walker strode into federal court in Baton Rouge in another challenge to LES and the state over approval of the Homer plant.
DEQ has not done the analysis of the environmental impacts and the harms that will come as a consequence of issuing air permits and water permits to LES to pollute our air and waterways. The proper analysis hasn't been done by the department.
Whenever that issue is decided, whatever the outcome of inevitable legal challenges CANT and environmental attorneys erect, Claiborne Parish will never be the same. Whether it gets its uranium plant or not, some people of a small town have stood up.
We're fighting a case here now, and look like the #1 thing that we would be able to win this case is the fact that there's environmental racism going on, and that's not just here. We finna be introduced to it. We're being introduced to it right now. But this has been an ongoing thing, not just in Louisiana, but throughout the nation.
I don't have that very much knowledge of uranium enrichment, but I sure have studied and have learned some about it. And I had common sense to know when I got into this and know what it wasn't anything good for us out there. Because if it had been, police, jury here at home, and no one else would have put it out there, or tried to put it out there.
The State Department of Environmental Quality did not participate in the arguments Tuesday in the case brought against it by the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund. Jeff had mentioned that the case was in federal court. It was actually in the Louisiana First Circuit Court of Appeal. Joining us to talk more about this issue and about changes that he sees for DEQ is the new secretary of that department, Dale Givens. Dale, welcome. For those of you who don't know you, you are a native of Alexandria but have been in Baton Rouge for the last 22 years, having been with DEQ since it was formed 11 years ago, and before that having been with Wildlife and Fisheries and the Louisiana Stream Control Commission, and you have quite a bit of experience in this area. We welcome you to the program. Let's start first to follow up on Jeff's story. Where does DEQ come down on this issue that Jeff just described?
Well, Robert, the LES facility is primarily regulated by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on the thing. They have preempted states and agencies in control of high-level radioactive type of substances. So the state's role is more of a peripheral one in dealing with, for instance, in the nuclear power plants, our Radiation Protection Division looks at emergency procedures and that side of it as opposed to the actual control inside the facility. So it would be a similar situation here. However, there are occasions where there could be a discharge or an emission of substances other than radiation from a site like this. It would require, for instance, a water discharge permit for sanitary sewage from the facility.
So there is some overlap in
jurisdiction. So there is some parallel, actually not overlapping, because NRC doesn't regulate the sewage part of it type of thing. And of course, as Jeff indicated in his story, the EPA is involved because at the present time there's a dual permitting system in Louisiana for water permits, in that the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, which is currently administered by EPA, requires a permit for water, as does state law and regulations for state wastewater permits.
The people from the Sierra Club Legal Defense Fund said that they wanted to see a zero tolerance on heavy metals and radiation in the waste stream from this plant. Is that possible?
Well, it's my understanding that zero is a moving target. As technology has changed over the years, we have been able to measure down to lower and lower concentrations on that. So it's kind of like in the comic strips when the detective would come into the laboratory and say that I want a complete analysis on this. We're still discovering elements and things like that. So it leaves some modicum of doubt as to exactly what they mean on that. I think what they mean is a very, very tight situation as opposed to the pure absolute of zero on it.
Are you convinced, let me just put it more plainly, are you convinced that no one would be harmed by the location of this plant in Claiborne Parish?
From what we have seen with respect to the air and water permits that were before the agency type of thing, we have proposed and issued permits for that part of it. We believe that part is safe. I have not tried to pass judgment on the overall facility itself. That is out of our area of expertise. As I said, it's regulated by NRC on that. And of course, there is some litigation taking place that I haven't even had a chance to see yet.
Didn't DEQ set up a study or a task force on the charges of environmental racism in Louisiana?
Yes, it did.
Did it reach any conclusions?
I'm not certain about that. That was handled by Secretary Kucharski and the other staff, and I have not this week had a chance to look at the file on that.
Okay. Let me shift from the specific topic of the uranium enrichment plant to DEQ in general. First of all, let me ask you this. In the philosophical spectrum with environmentalists on one side and industry on the other, where do you fall in that spectrum?
Right square in the middle, straight down the line type of thing. What I hope to be able to bring to the table on this is a balance that we treat each entity as an equal at the table on that we don't lean left or right, if you want, type of thing. We have a set of rules and regulations that are fixed today, but that are dynamic in nature. That is, that the rules and regs change as change needs to be brought about down the road. It is our intention to live by those rules and regulations as a tool to do the job of protecting the state and the health of and welfare of the citizens and the environment, and doing that while at the same time not being an obstructionist to doing business in the state of Louisiana.
It's my understanding that during the last 4 years, so-called enforcement actions brought by DEQ against people believed to be not following the environmental laws of the state have steadily declined. Where do you see enforcement actions going under your watch?
Well, enforcement actions and the term that you're couching in that way normally are fines or penalties or compliance orders or some sort of a legal action in a sort of a formal document on that. But enforcement also involves our inspectors going out and seeing a problem, and if it's a problem of a minor nature that's easily corrected, pointing it out to the facility and said, look, you know, you could do a better job if you do this type of situation, and trying to work in a more cooperative manner. Usually that can result in a notice of violation type of a document, which doesn't automatically trigger a penalty. When the previous administration came into office, there had been a 511% increase in the appeals of compliance orders that were issued by the agency, due to the fact that they had gone from a situation of trying to work towards cooperatively to solve a problem to a situation where it was automatically noted in the compliance orders that if you didn't appeal this within 20 days, you lost all your rights. So the numbers just skyrocketed on that type of thing. There were some very heavy penalties assessed. Unfortunately, not very many of those have been collected because they were all appealed, and that drags out the process.
You're referring to the Romer administration?
Yes, sir.
That was when there was a spike in the appeals?
That's correct.
And then there has been a downturn in the last 4 years?
That's right, because what we have tried to do is note where we have there's a problem. We may issue a notice of violation, we may issue a compliance order, and if necessary, we'll issue a penalty on the thing. But what we try to do is get people to voluntarily come to the table and say, I've got a problem and I need some help to know how to solve that problem, as opposed to just immediately going out and levying a fine or a penalty, which for something that may be very routine and not causing environmental problem. In other words, it may be a technical problem and not necessarily one of environmental magnitude that would justify these very, very large penalties.
Something that I understand may be on the horizon, and which is something of an extension of what you describe, has been described to me as a self-auditing process, where the Louisiana chemical industry is proposing that it be allowed to, in effect, police itself on its emissions. Where do you stand on that?
Well, the relatively new concept of an environmental self-audit is something that's still being discussed and debated considerably. If you look back as far as 1972, when the Clean Water Act amendments, when they were passed and the NPDES program was set up, it was envisioned by Congress that it be largely a self-regulating program. in that a discharge or self-monitoring report is required to be filed by each permittee, where they do indeed monitor the contents of their discharge and report it to EPA and the states on that type of thing. Since that point in time, the International Standards Organization, or ISO, has come up with a lot of programs that are designed to standardize the way of doing business on a global economy type of thing, to bring together a common set of rules on that. And part of that concept has involved self-audits, not only in the environment but in other areas. And I think that that has helped drive the concern of not only the chemical industry but the petroleum industry and local government as well. So to repeat again what I just said is that basically if somebody undertakes an audit, or whatever you want to call it, a study or an investigation in their plant, and they come to DEQ and said, look, we have discovered we have a problem, and we want to correct that, and we want to bring it to your attention on that type of thing, and it has not been a flagrant, intentional type of a situation. Our tendency is going to be to work with them. We may give them some compliance dates or whatever else to make sure that, that these things don't fall off the table. But rather than automatically triggering a penalty, we're going to try to work towards compliance. Compliance is what we want, and a permit is the best compliance tool we have.
We're going to have to leave it right there. I know we're going to be hearing more about self-auditing, but Dale Givens, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
That is our program for this evening. We invite you to join us again next week when Jeff Dewey will investigate the possibility of our state's landing a stretch of the proposed new I-69. Central and Northwest Louisiana stand to profit from another transportation artery and from many new construction jobs. That next week. Until then, that's the state we're in.
Production funding for this program is provided by the Fred B. and Ruth B. Ziegler Foundation of Jennings, Louisiana. Visit the Ziegler Museum Tuesday through Saturday from 9 to 5 and Sunday from 1 to 5, featuring a distinctive collection of European and American fine art and wildlife dioramas. And by the Louisiana Trial Lawyers Association. LTLA members work for consumers' rights, workplace safety, and for equal and fair representation before a court of law.